Previously on X-Men.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy Gem Mint.
Milton the Manimal.
We're here with our very first jumping on point video. This is where to start reading the X-Men. So a lot of you guys in the comments have asked us this, or in the live chats, where do I start reading X-Men? So we wanted to make a video. I personally didn't want to make it where it's like, start reading here and, go on. So This is going to be like suggestions on different jumping on points.
Yeah, we'll kind of talk about the key eras, if you will, and also kind of highlight, where to pick up the books, where these volumes are available, what format they're available in, and things like that. And we're kind of just going to go off of chronologically based on eras and explain why each point would be a good jumping on point.
Perfect. So you guys stick around and stay tuned for the jumping on point. Alright guys, so we're going to start this thing off. The first and most obvious place to start reading the X-Men is right at the beginning, the 1960s Silver Age run, written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby.
Yeah, so, like Jem said, start at the beginning. But some of the downsides to these Silver Age books is they're very verbose, if you will.
Wow, that's a good word.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know what it means.
It would have fit perfectly in the Silver Age.
Yeah, so the exposition is very heavy. The dialogue is walls and walls of text and outdated kind of dialogue. But I think, for me, I'm the type of reader that has to start at the beginning. I'll power through that shit.
Yeah, it's important, too. And you want to know where all the characters kind of come from and, like, their first interactions with each other. But also, the things with the Silver Age is the writing's a lot different. And some of the story that you read in the Silver Age isn't necessary to know down the line.
Yeah, so just as a quick example, the Silver Age X-Men is issues 1 through 66? 66, right? In the beginning, it was just Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, but then we ended up getting Roy Thomas, Neil Adams, Arnold Drake, Gary Friedrich, Werner Roth, Don Heck. And to me, really only like the first 20 issues are really important. I mean, you get all the first. You get the first original team: Cyclops, Beast, Angel, Marvel Girl, Iceman.
And then you get Scarlet Witch, Brotherhood of Evil Mutants,
Professor X, Magneto.
Professor X, Magneto.
Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. You get
Juggernaut.
The Blob. You get the Sentinels. You get Eunice. You get Mimic. So you get Sauron and the Savage Land.
So yeah, the first 20 issues, well, to be honest with you, the first 66 issues are all pretty much first appearances. I mean, even later on, you get characters like Havoc and Polaris and Sunfire.
That's true.
Guys that show up. So yeah,
Banshee.
And it's not a lot of reading. 66 issues. I mean,
Silver Age
issues.
Though, that's you might be able to knock out 1 or 2 issues a day
before you fall asleep.
But, I mean, it's important stories. I mean, we've mentioned this in other videos that this is kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's the lore of the X-Men. I mean, it's the original. It's
heavily influenced by the Civil Rights era.
True.
Mutants are minorities, and they're kind of metaphors.
Yeah, to the, as we said before, and I'm sure you've probably heard the Malcolm X and the
Dr. Martin Luther King, which
yeah.
is kind of like Magneto and Professor X. So anyway, we don't want to spend too much time on each jumping on point. This is the first place you could jump on. You could try to buy the omnibus, which collects all 66 issues. However, Volume 1 is kind of a whale, very expensive, hard to find. You could pick up the Marvel Masterworks, have hardcovers and trade paperbacks, which I did a quick search. You could pick the trade paperbacks up for cheap.
You can also get, if you don't really care too much and you want to go cheap, there is the Essential X-Men, which would be black and white, all black and white, and it's a pretty thin book. I think you can get that for like $10 or $15, to be honest.
What about is there Epic collections?
That I'm not sure.
I don't collect those.
But something to keep in mind when you're searching, though, as someone who kind of searches for X-Men Omnis regularly to see if they're back in stock, keep in mind that this later was the Uncanny X-Men, but it's titled as the X-Men, these first 66 issues.
Right, so little fun fact. The book was called The X-Men, and then around, what issue was it? It was like in the one
of Future Past.
Well, that's when it was official, but they started writing Uncanny X-Men in the early 100 issues. But issue 142 is when the insignia, when the actual book was changed over to the Uncanny X-Men. Right. And that's actually a good segue into our next jumping on point.
So that's your first jumping on point. Your second jumping on point is going to be a little easier, a little bit more modern, the classic storylines. And this is going to be what we call the Claremont era, correct?
Yeah, which is also the Bronze Age of X-Men comics.
So it starts off, the one that kind of kicks it all off was the revamp, was the Giant Size X-Men #1. But before that, we had the reprints that we kind of wanted to talk about.
So really quick, X-Men 66 was the last original Silver Age X-Men story. And then they started reprinting all their issues from earlier books until issue 93 was the last reprint. Then you have Giant Size X-Men 1 comes out. Chris Claremont comes out the gate with a brand new team. Let's count it down. You got Wolverine,
Nightcrawler,
Colossus,
Storm,
Thunderbird.
Banshee.
Is Banshee on the team?
Yeah.
And then that's it. And Firestar?
Sunfire.
And then Sunfire, who ends up leaving.
Yeah.
And Thunderbird gets killed.
Yeah.
Alright, so anyway. But Giant Size X-Men
Spoiler alert.
Giant Size X-Men 1 comes out the gate, reboots the team, really.
Yeah, so it had taken, the X-Men hadn't kicked off. And the other big thing to key on Giant Size X-Men 1 was the big sell was it's an international team. No longer is it just Americans. In fact, every character outside of Thunderbird, who's a Native American, though, was outside of America.
So Wolverine's from Canada, Storm's from
Africa.
Is this she from?
Nairobi.
Is it Nairobi?
Yeah.
Then you have Nightcrawlers from Germany.
Germany, Banshee from Ireland.
And Colossus is from Russia.
And Sunfire, Japan.
So, so Giant Size X-Men, then you pick up where the Silver Age reprints leave off, and it goes X-Men 94. So with issue 94 on, the book starts saying the all-new, all-different X-Men, still called the X-Men. Then on issue 114, they start giving it an adjective, because all the Marvel books had adjectives.
Right.
This is the Uncanny X-Men, the Amazing Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, the Mighty Thor.
I never knew. It's funny how comics kind of extend your vocabulary. I never knew what the fuck uncanny meant.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because of X-Men and comics, that word's in my vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, like I said, in issue 142, they officially titled the book The Uncanny X-Men. That's not really that important. Little fun fact for you. What's important is, besides you getting the brand new team, a couple issues in issue 100, Jean Grey turns into Phoenix. Mm-hmm. Then you get a bunch of, Shi'ar? Is it that?
Yeah, so, I mean, the reason why this is a jumping on point is because Claremont introduced themes and stories that would influence the X-Men going forth. Like, the space stuff honestly kind of became the X-Men. They became sort of a space team for a long time.
Yeah, you had the Starjammers team, which was Cyclops and Havoc's father.
Mm-hmm.
What's his name again?
Corsair.
That was always a weird name for me.
Yeah, and so he was basically a space pirate.
He's a space pirate.
So you had that. You had the Brood. Key storylines in this is the Dark Phoenix stuff, like you mentioned.
So that starts happening around issue, 134, I believe.
Yeah.
And then you have Cyclops leaving the team. Is that when he goes to form X-Factor?
Yes.
Yeah. So he leaves the team. Then you have Days of Future Past, which we kind of talked about. Mm-hmm. Days of Future Past might be a good jump on point too, actually. But I mean, you might as well read the first couple of issues of Uncanny.
I may not understand anything. And the funny thing is, a lot of people think of Days of Future Past as being like a storyline. It was actually only 2 issues. Futuristic type stories.
The first Elseworld kind of, that's like a DC term, but like one of the first alternate universe things. And we'll talk more about that. But then this run actually goes up until, when is it?
Goes up. Claremont writes all the way up till around Uncanny X-Men 280. And then that's when we'll get into the next jumping on point.
So you could buy the omnibus. The thing about Uncanny, they get reprints. So if they're not available on InStockTrades.com, which is where I recommend to buy omnibus, look for Amazon. You don't really want to spend cover price on these if you don't have to.
Right.
They have a $100 cover price, and typically when they're new and newly reprinted, InStock Trades will have them for 50% off.
And like we mentioned with the first jumping on point, you can also collect the Essential X-Men, Essential Uncanny X-Men. It's black and white, caveat for that, but it's cheap and you can read it.
Look for other formats. Look for Marvel Masterworks. Go on Marvel Unlimited, the app, and see if they have this stuff.
Torrent sites as well, maybe?
I don't know if we really want to promote that, but,
Yeah.
a lot of people want to. This is how I like to read them.
Right.
Because it's all complete in the best format you can have. Mm-hmm. But if you just search those other formats that we mentioned, you might find cheaper alternatives.
Yeah, so that would be our second jumping on point, mainly because of Chris Claremont being probably the most influential X-Men writer and the stories that encompass his era.
So we mentioned that Claremont writes up until issues 280. So you have the introduction of a lot of new X-Men during that time. Want to count them down? You got Jubilee,
Rogue,
Gambit,
Psylocke gets a big role.
Right, so for a jumping on, to me, you would start with Giant Size and just plow through that whole Claremont era.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of fan characters are introduced in that Claremont run, and you have key storylines too, like the Inferno storyline, Fall of the Mutants.
But you also have Mutant Massacre.
Mutant Massacre. You got where the X-Men go to Madripoor, or I'm not sorry, Madripoor, where they go to Australian Outback, and it's kind of like a different team.
And they start branching out to like Wolverine gets his solo series, but we'll save that for a Wolverine jump on point.
So just that Claremont era is very, in my opinion, it's probably the best place to jump on. It's all older, it's not super modern, but it's where all your characters that have your heart and the people that you love, that's where they're going to show up.
Cool. So that's going to wrap up the second option on where you can start reading the X-Men, and we're going to go ahead and breeze into part 3, which is almost a continuation of this.
Pretty much.
All right, so
but more 90s, yeah.
Let's do it. All right, so the third jumping on point is something where we're getting more into the Copper Age. Jim Lee jumps on board drawing, and you still have Claremont writing X-Men. I don't really recommend that you would start right at the beginning with this book, right? Because this starts with Uncanny 244, which is the first appearance of Jubilee.
Right.
The next jumping on point is more of the Jim Lee just X-Men title, Adjectiveless X-Men.
The 90s X-Men, the quintessential,
Volume
what everyone
2.
remembers. And it kickstarts at that X-Men 1, and honestly, you can pick up X-Men 1 and be good to go.
With X-Men 1, you have Magneto is on Asteroid M. His acolytes are bringing him back in. You have the Omega Red introduction in issue 4. And then you get the Blue Team and Gold Team stuff.
Right, so X-Men Blue the X-Men Blue team runs in the Jim Lee run, the X-Men no adjective. Uncanny X-Men then takes over the X-Men Gold, which is 280 and forward.
So break down the blue and gold teams for these guys. I know that's a big question.
Always. So X-Men Blue is led by Cyclops. And, Xavier kind of bops back and forth, so we won't even count him. So you got Cyclops, Wolverine, Psylocke, Gambit, Rogue, Beast, and Jubilee. X-Men Gold is going to be Storm, Colossus, Iceman, Archangel, Bishop, Jean Grey, and I believe that's it.
So this is actually important in current X-Men runs. Dan, did you see that X-Men Black?
That's dope. Yeah.
So anyway, this is where we first get like these two different... X-Men got so big.
Too many characters,
too many mutants. We're going to get into no more mutants. You have two different teams. You have your blue and your gold, and that's all that means. I know somebody asked us recently in a live stream, what's the deal with that?
And so just a side note, we don't want to get too much in the weeds with the X-Men, but this era of the 90s kind of kickstarts where you had other X teams. You had X-Factor, and you had X-Force, and you had the New Mutants, and different teams that, like Jem said, there were so many characters. X-Men just became this, like, huge title.
It was like
so many.
This own universe within the Marvel universe,
exactly.
Right? Its own self-contained thing. So we'll talk about other X books and New Mutants and Excalibur in a different video. Mm-hmm. But basically, that third jumping on point, pick up X-Men Volume 2. Jim Lee did the first, what is it? I think he did the first 10 or 11 issues. Don't quote me on that. But that's where you get the 90s X-Men stuff, and that's a good place to jump on. I don't know where you would jump off because it kind of goes for a while. So with this, too, in terms of where you can pick it up, would you say Volume 2? And honestly, you could probably get X-Men 1, the most highest-selling comic of all time, pretty easy if you wanted a single issue. You could probably buy those first 10 issues in single issues in dollar bins at your local comic shop. For sure, yeah. We have the omnibus. I'm not really sure what other formats. Again, you just search X-Men Volume 2, search X-Men Jim Lee trade paperback, or what have you, and I'm sure you'll find another format. So moving forward here, we don't want to get too bogged down with some of the storylines, but some of the ones that happen before we get to our next jumping on point is you're going to have, like Jem said, you have the Omega Red, you got the Fatal Attractions, which crosses over in a bunch of the X titles, you got the wedding of Cyclops and Jean Grey, and then we got our next segue is the next big event is Legion Quest. Okay. All right, guys, another great jumping on point, and kind of chronologically next, after you get out of those 200 issues with Claremont, you get X-Men Age of Apocalypse. Yeah, so this was, I guess the best way I can describe this is almost like the ultimate universe for the X-Men. It was a apocalyptic universe where all the characters were changed. Some guys were good that were bad, and bad are good.
And honestly, if you don't know anything about the X-Men, you can jump right into this and not be influenced really at all.
You just do lose a little bit because Cyclops being bad is a huge deal.
Huge,
right?
yeah.
So if you're just jumping on, you might think, oh, Cyclops is a dick. Which he kind of always is anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is like an alternate timeline story. It kind of like looks at Days of Future Past and say, let's do a whole story of that.
Yes.
But
like you said, Days of Future Past was just 2 issues, but it's so loved.
So what happens here? First, you do want to read Legion Quest. Well, Legion Quest deals with Legion, who is Professor X's son.
Mm-hmm.
A quick overview on him. He's an incredibly powerful mutant. He has basically multiple personalities who all have their own mutant powers. And what's his real deal? Like, I've read the Modern, but he basically loses it and tears stuff up.
Yeah, so in this, his big motivation here is he's trying to help his father out. And who's been the biggest hiccup in his father's life? And it's been Magneto.
Right.
So long story short, spoiler alert, he tries to go back in time and kill Magneto, which would then allow his father to have created the perfect world between mutant and humans. But it goes awry, and just as Xavier is, he sacrifices himself, and he ends up dying instead of Magneto, which kickstarts the Age of Apocalypse.
So basically, it just splits that timeline to a whole other direction, and then after Legion Quest, you get the Age of Apocalypse. And Age of Apocalypse, like we kind of mentioned, just throws everything upside down. You have Magneto's good, he's married to Rogue, Sabretooth's good, Cyclops is bad. And what happens in Age of Apocalypse is that you basically... Marvel kind of rebranded all their X books at the time, and you had all these little mini-series of different versions of teams that we know, right? So you want to break them down?
Yeah, so you had X-Men became the Astonishing X-Men, Uncanny became the Amazing X-Men, Excalibur became Excalibur, X-Force became, I think, Generation Next. There was Gambit and the Externals. Mm-hmm. X-Factor became Factor X.
It was just like slightly different versions of what we knew.
Cable became X-Man, and then there was Wolverine became Weapon X.
And that's it. And
they were all 4-part miniseries, and then there was a couple little tie-in 1 and 2 issues here and there.
Exactly. So this is a great jumping-on point. It's actually one of your favorite X-Men stories.
It might be my all-time favorite X-Men story.
It's a lot of people's favorite. And it was actually not always your favorite.
No, in fact, it got me out of collecting for a little while.
As a kid, you were like, what the hell? They're making all these changes? I'm out.
Yeah, exactly. But let's talk about where you can collect
So
it.
Legion Quest is an oversized hardcover. This is a recent release, and it does double dip with the omnibus. But this has a $75 cover price. It's probably still heavily discounted on in-stock trades or on Amazon. You could go with the omnibus, which might be your best bet on these, man.
Yeah, so you can get the Omnis. There's also 4 trade paperbacks as well that collects the whole story. The Omnis are, a volume 1 and then a companion?
Yeah, just not even a volume 1, just Age of Apocalypse, and then there's the companion, which basically has like little tie-in stories that add to the main stories. I actually haven't read the companion yet.
Yeah, so it looks like there's even some really modern stuff in here in the companion. So the reason why this is an important jumping on point is, honestly, going forward in X-Men history, this always kind of pops back up. Certain characters that existed in this world do exist in the main universe now, and they always kind of revisit it a little bit.
All right, guys, so this is a good jumping on point. If you want something a little bit more modern, you kind of want to get out of that extreme 90s, which is very much Age of Apocalypse. Mm-hmm. And we didn't mention Onslaught. I don't think that's really a good jumping on point. That's probably better to jump on after reading Age of Apocalypse.
Right. There's a lot of little stories and arcs that we just kind of skip past because they aren't good jumping on points. So don't think we didn't know or think about them.
Yeah, and this is not every omnibus gem has. This
Right.
is where you can start reading X-Men. So New X-Men by Grant Morrison is a good jumping on point for something modern. It's actually what heavily influenced the first X-Men movies, which is kind of like the new era of superhero movies.
Yeah, it also was. I felt like maybe this isn't true, and I might be corrected on this, but I also kind of felt like it was the first time the movies somewhat influenced the comics. Like, they started drawing the characters that way in terms of like the costumes. They made them older.
Yeah, they were wearing the black leather jackets.
Yeah.
They weren't wearing the spandex superhero pajamas. This is where we get.
This is kind of also a big deal, and she had been around for a little while in different issues and different coming up, but this is kind of where Emma Frost joins the X-Men and really becomes an X-Men mainstay going forward. So she's always kind of been a villain. She worked with the Generation X, and she was a teacher for a while, but this is really where she jumps on the X-Men team.
So then you have this team of, Wolverine, Cyclops, Emma Frost, Beast, and this is where Beast becomes more of the animal beast that we know now. You know, an interesting tidbit about this Emma Frost. I remember getting back into comics and reading like Avengers vs. X-Men, and I'm like, when the hell did the White Queen become a good guy?
Right.
So, you know, I only knew her from like the Marvel Masterpiece trading cards, but this is where you see her go from that villain from the Hellfire Club to the one of the X-Men.
Yeah, and this also kind of was. This is Grant Morrison took the team and basically brought it back to its roots, which was like, hey, we think we've all kind of forgotten that this is supposed to be a school. Right. So that's the focus here, really, is these are 5 or 6 X-Men, Jean Grey included as well, who are teaching up-and-coming new mutants. And it's really school-oriented. If you're into the whole Xavier Institute, this is a great jumping on point.
And they kind of, that's funny, so ever since New X-Men, they kind of kept that theme alive for a while, going all the way up to Wolverine and the X-Men. And
yeah, it tends to dip out and dip back in.
Yeah, because you got to remember, Claremont took them to outer space, and they were space pirates or whatever.
Right, exactly.
So Astonishing X-Men, to me, is a good follow-up to New X-Men. Is it a good jumping on point? Maybe you could, but I just would recommend to read New X-Men first. Josh Whedon, who directed the Avengers, among other things, was the writer for this run. And this kind of brings back Colossus and Kitty Pryde as major players in the X-Men.
It's a good jumping on point in terms of it's a number 1, and it is a standalone arc for the most part, the whole series. And you don't have to know a lot about X-Men history. You could really read Astonishing X-Men and be good to go.
And the art is very modernized and looks great. As opposed to New X-Men, where the art is not really that good. If you're one that's driven by art, it's probably going to be hard for you.
The other thing, another plus as I'm thinking about it too, is Astonishing X-Men has new villains. It doesn't really dip too much into old villains, so you don't have to know past histories a lot. So it could be a really good jumping, a real standalone issue or set you could read.
So cool. So I think that's good. That's a great jumping on point to go into the modern age. If we want to move a little bit more modern, a little after the early 2000s, stay tuned. All right, guys. Jumping out of the early 2000s, another great jumping on point around the late 2000s is going to be House of M.
So House of M kind of stems out of a couple events I'm sure you've probably heard of. One that you may not is the Avengers Disassembled, which is basically the fall of the Avengers, which kind of kickstarted and led into Civil War. But the main thing you need to know about this is that Scarlet Witch had kind of lost her mind, and her powers got so powerful that she basically said, look, no more mutants. She got mad at her father, or I can't remember the exact circumstances, but she says no more mutants.
Which is almost like the readers or the writers talking, because at this time you have so many mutants, so many X characters, X books, X titles. It's like, yo, enough of it. Thanos that stuff. Mm-hmm. And she does it in the comics. And I got to tell you, when I was reading it, I know what's coming, and then when she says it, it's like you get the goosebumps. You're like, oh.
Yeah, it was crazy.
It's like the Thanos snap, because basically every single mutant, how many stay out of
198.
198 mutants are left out of millions.
Out of millions, yes.
So that it's a crazy story. It's almost like
well, it's kind of like Age of Apocalypse in a way.
That's what I was gonna say.
Where it's like its own little universe. So it has a bunch of miniseries.
It's like a post-apocalyptic environment, because they're all in
Genosha.
Genosha.
They have their own. So basically, House of M is Magneto's the king of the world, and his family is all with him. All of his kids, Polaris, Quicksilver, and Scarlet Witch. Mutants run the whole world, and the Avengers are kind of like freedom fighters, and it's crazy. Right. It's its own little standalone, but there's a few characters that are in the know and that like aren't affected.
Right, exactly. So it's not really that big of a read, although there are a ton of tie-ins that I don't even have, but you could read just House of M and be all set. This oversized hardcover is like a $30 cover price. You can still find this in shops and buy it on Amazon, but it leads into one of Manimal's favorite runs.
Yeah, and so the reason why we don't want to skip this is it's so influential to the X-Men universe going forward, because after this you had things like the 198, and you had the Decimation, and you had Endangered Species. I mean, this set the tone for the X-Men for a decade, really, where their numbers were down, they were an endangered species, and which led into, yes, one of my favorite modern runs, which is the Messiah Complex, which basically deals with the first mutant birth since Scarlet Witch's No More Mutants.
And this deals, it gets Cable back in the mix with Hope Summers, this child-born mutant. It branches off into the X-Force Volume 2, which is one of your favorite X-Force runs, with the Kyle and Yost team-up, which we're not going to talk about, but the Messiah Complex, Messiah War, X-Necrotia, that's all follow-up from the aftermath of House of M. We would recommend heavily to read these if you want to jump right into some gritty, modern X-Men stuff.
Yeah, and it kind of brings back the teams. And I mean, I can't skip by saying this. This is also written by Brubaker. So,
okay. And this is by Bendis, so great writers.
Yeah, great writers. And this kind of set the tone for the X-Men going forward. It really affects the character of Cyclops. So if you're a Cyclops fan and you want to know what's up with him, this is where you got to start.
You get some good Bishop stuff as well.
Some great Bishop stuff. So
I don't know. We didn't really spend that much time on this, but as you can see, it's not as much content as those other books. It's fun, fast, quick reads. You're into modern art with not as much dialogue.
Right.
And, in modern art, we realize we can tell stories without words. Mm-hmm. So, it's not walls of text for, those of you that are like me and don't want to read walls of text or novels or whatever. This is a great jumping on point.
Probably the best modern jumping on point. Modern, as in like recent.
And because you can even go deeper. Like after you read these, like I said, it goes into X-Force Volume 2. It goes into Messiah War. Then what's that? After Necrosha X, it even goes somewhere else. I don't remember.
Yeah, Second Coming.
And all that stuff. So I felt like I was doing you guys a disservice if we didn't show you the other books. So follow-ups are X-Men Endangered Species, X-Men Second Coming Revelations. I already mentioned that X-Force run. So you can pick all these up on... I got them all on Amazon for less than cover price.
So there's no Omni that collects
There's no Omni, and there are trade paperbacks as well. Right. But, I mean, for like $30 or $10, $15, you can't really go wrong with the hardcovers.
And if you're a single-issue kind of guy, I mean, you can probably find these. These are all still around, still very popular storylines. Might be a little hard to snag up, but they're there.
And if you want, like, a reading order of these, really all you have to do is, like, figure out what issues they contain. Like, for example... Second Coming is X-Men 523, 525. So then you look for Uncanny X-Men, you can see that Endangered Species is much earlier. It's 488 through 491. So that's how you can kind of chronologically figure out what to read first if you just start picking up all these titles.
So you would start Endangered, and then you'd go to Messiah Complex, and then you kind of move forward that way.
But basically it all starts with this. All right, guys. So if you want to jump on even more modern to stuff that kind of... directly impacts what's going on now still, correct?
Yeah, for the most part.
This is kind of where I jumped back into X-Men when I first started getting back into comics. It had to be around 2012 or so. X-Men Schism is kind of a civil war of the X-Men.
Right.
And this is where the X-Men get divided and Cyclops and Wolverine are pitted against each other. And it kind of sets the tone of something which you're not a fan of, where Wolverine is the responsible good guy and Cyclops is the AWOL rogue tough guy.
So a lot of this stems out of things that we had talked about before. A lot of this comes from the Messiah Complex storyline, decisions Cyclops has made along the way, and for whatever reason, I'll keep opinions out of it, but Wolverine doesn't agree with it, and it breaks the X-Men down the middle. Half go with Cyclops, half go with Wolverine.
And what happens at the time is that you get two new X-Men titles. Then you get Uncanny X-Men starts with a new number 1.
Right.
And then you get Wolverine in the X-Men where he's the headmaster and he's with Storm as like his boo and they introduce a bunch of new mutants. Like what's my man's name? Quentin.
Well, that he shows up in new X-Men.
He does.
But he comes back. So this is once again, like we said, they cycle back to the school atmosphere again.
So when I first was introduced to these new mutants, Quentin Quire was a very powerful one. When I went back and read New X-Men, I was like, oh, that's where he came from. So it's okay to jump on here, but I don't know why you wouldn't just jump on with New X-Men and all that other stuff.
I mean, honestly, a lot of what we're going to talk about now reflects, unfortunately, a lot of Marvel's going forward reflected their movies, like their cinematic universe. So Wolverine was the popular guy in the movie, so he became the forefront of the comics as well for a long time.
And what's important about these books is that it leads directly into Avengers vs. X-Men, which at the time was pitted as like a really big event. It was kind of like the first big event before everybody got tired of events.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
And what was dope about that is that you had Avengers vs. X-Men. Avengers was super popular at the time in the movies. Mm-hmm. It deals with the Phoenix and the Phoenix Force. And
Hope Summers comes back.
Yeah. We don't really want to get to spoilers, but it's a nice, fun action blockbuster. Not really a thinker kind of a book. But the Emma Frost stuff is cool too.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if it's a good jumping on point, if you're not entirely sure you like the X-Men, so you don't want to read just X-Men heavy and you want a little Avengers to, kind of wash the X-Men taste out your mouth a little bit, it's a great jumping on point. But like Jim said, it kickstarted what was called event fatigue, which came down the line.
Because after that, you had Original Sin, and then you had Age of Ultron, and then you had a bunch of other stuff I can't even remember.
So that's kind of the end so much for the until we get to the real modern stuff. We're going to gloss over things like Avenger or X-Men versus Inhumans, stories like that aren't really jumping on points. But until you get to the real modern, like the current modern, they've revamped the X-Men again, and they brought back the X-Men Blue team, the Gold team. There's an X-Men Red team, and we just saw a solicitation for X-Men Black that's going to be coming out sometime soon.
So to wrap up this jump on point, right?
Sorry, did I jump too far?
I believe this Schism is also collected in another hardcover I have. Again, the omnibus or the oversized hardcovers you don't have to hunt down. Especially, I think Wolverine and the X-Men is out of print, which could be a little bit pricey. But this is volume 1, because I believe after this is like a 42 issue run, they do a volume 2 of Wolverine and the X-Men, which obviously you would want to read volume 1 first. Mm-hmm. Avengers vs. X-Men has oversized hardcovers, which I'm sure are pretty affordable still, and a companion, because they had a bunch of tie-ins for this. They had an AVX tie-in, which was just like straight up 2 different battles, kind of like a Street Fighter book kind of a thing.
I think each book actually had like 3 battles within it.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't even remember. But they had a lot of tie-ins. So you could still go oversized hardcovers for those, because I'm pretty sure that they're still inexpensive. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's going to wrap up this jumping on point. We have one last one, which we kind of already touched on, but we'll go in more in depth now. All right, guys, so the last jumping on point that we're going to do for X-Men kind of kicks off where the X-Men are at now. I don't have a book for them. I'm kind of surprised. I used to have single issues.
Yeah, so there's a little storyline called, I believe it's Battle of the Atom, and you get what's typically referred to now as the time-displaced X-Men. So you have the original 5 X-Men are brought to the present by Beast, basically to convince Cyclops that what he's doing is wrong.
Yeah, like, so if you see your old self as a kid, you'll remember what you're fighting for, and you won't be Cyclops was right, X-Face, masked Cyclops. Then that leads into their own run called All New X-Men, which is written by Bendis, and that's where that 5 time-displaced first original team gets their own run, gets their own identity, and become canon, I guess, in the current X-Men lore.
Yeah, and it pretty much, like we said, deals with, how they are all, not just Cyclops, but interacting with their counterparts. Jean Grey, having Jean Grey dead. Angel at the time, I don't believe there's an Angel around. He's also kind of dead.
So it freaks him out on what happened to me in the future. Like, I die, I become Archangel, what the hell? Mm-hmm. And then, damn, I don't even know how do you collect that. I don't know if there must be trade paperbacks or something.
Yeah, trades. I mean, the single issues are probably still very affordable and are out there as well. These are only a couple years old, 4 or 5 years old, maybe.
Yeah, and then it leads into the current stuff, which you have X-Men Blue, X-Men Gold, which we talked about was introduced in that 90s X-Men Volume 2, Jim Lee, Chris Claremont.
Right, so they went back to the old routine. X-Men Blue is what we were just talking about, the time-displaced X-Men, basically working together with Magneto at this point. X-Men Gold is the X-Men team who's now led by Kitty Pryde and is the leader of the X-Men.
And then what about where our time-displaced guys are in this? Yeah, Blue.
And then you have an X-Men Red title where Jean Grey has came back from the dead, and she's forming her own team as well.
And then today is what, July
16th?
They just announced an X-Men Black team. That's kind of where we're at with the current X-Men, all these different colored teams.
Well, and both these titles, I believe, are ending soon as well to issue 36.
Yeah, because these are the first volumes of the trades. I think there are like 3 or 4 trades for each of them out right now. I don't really know about this story, but I know you've been reading it.
They're great. I don't want to get into spoilers as well, but like we said, this is time-displaced X-Men, kind of dealing with Magneto. X-Men Gold is more your traditional team, some of the fan favorites led by Kitty Pryde. And, up to stuff that the X-Men are up to.
Exactly. So, I guess that's going to wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed this Where Do I Start Reading X-Men? I think this is a good resource that you can get an idea of the different eras, the different storylines, writers, artists, and what they bring to those stories.
Yeah, I know we gave you guys a lot of information, but you kind of got to look into what do you like? Do you like the modern? Do you like the origin stories? Exactly. What do you like? And kind of based off what we were talking about.
So we just wanted to give you guys options. We probably left stuff out. We don't know everything. So you don't have to say, you forgot... what's one of the
Inferno
or Supernovas? Yeah, we know this is not every X-Men book ever. It's just our suggestions for jumping on points. In the description of the video, I'm gonna have little timestamps on it where you could just jump to Silver Age, Bronze Age, Copper, Modern, whatever. So you guys can use that if you like, and let us know what you guys want to see next. I'm sure Spider-Man is gonna be a big one. Batman.
And in the comments, also let us know if, this is our first time doing with these jumping on points, if you would like a different format, possibly, if you would like us to break it down a little differently. Was this too confusing? Was this perfect? We want the feedback. You know how we are.
Give us some suggestions.
Yeah.
So make sure you like the video. Drop us a line in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more jumping on points. Where do I read this? Where do I read that? And stay minty fresh, y'all.
Peace.